Hello fellow Runeterrans! So, roughly a week ago, Kanon dropped the full interview with Ghostcrawler, also known as Greg Street, the lead developer of the upcoming MMO by Riot. I highly recommend you to watch this video, but this interview is quite long and it's basically a laid-back interview with a lot of fun insights of development and Greg's personal career. They talk about gaming and MMOs in general, but for the ones who don't have so much time on their hands, I wanted to make a little summary of what could be of some importance for the Riot MMO. Keep in mind that Greg leads the team, but that the team members are also a very big part of the development. Sometimes I feel Greg is like the medium for the team, while the team members actually really like to open up to conversations, for example on Reddit or Twitter. So if you are new to the channel, first of all, welcome and thank you for watching this video. If you want to be notified for future content, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. I mostly cover news and updates about Riot MMO, but also different games in the making by Riot. Okay, enough ranting, let's dive into the interview. First important bit. Greg mentioned he loved to play the games he worked on. He would come home from working on WoW and then at home he would play it again. And he will play the Riot MMO, if it's released of course. In my opinion, that is gold. If you have developers playing themselves, you know that the games they make will improve. It's much easier to be critical on your own game if you play the shit out of it yourself. That's what also happens to League. The devs played it and they had a lot of fun with it. And if developers make a game because they love the genre, it will be a work of love for the genre and not just to make a quick cash grab. I don't point fingers at anyone. Blizzard. Next up, he covered his top 3 MMOs. So, short but powerful. The first one, World of Warcraft, second one, Star Wars Galaxies, and the third one, Ultima Online. But he also mentioned something interesting in my opinion. And yes, I will analyze the shit out of this. Greg mentioned Destiny 2. And this is interesting because Destiny 2, its design is not that of a typical MMO we all used to love. He mentions that it doesn't have to be a WoW clone. If you look at Riot games, we all know they like to do things that are familiar but give their own twist to it. And I could see them breaking the mold here, like Destiny does. It's a looter shooter, but obviously the MMO will not be a shooter, but more a traditional MMO design with classes, but with storyline missions based in the world of Runeterra, together with players with loot at the end of each mission. I think it would be a pretty cool way to end the boring and tedious questing designs we see in so many MMOs. Make quests instanced and accessible in the open world, together with a group of people, like in Guild Wars 1. They did that also, I think. You could actually play through missions and you could adjust the difficulty. And I think even in the end of the game you could make Vanquisher titles and stuff, and it was pretty cool. They could even add difficulty levels to the quests with special rewards linked to different optional objectives. And poof, buy boring quests. Anyway, up to the next. Greg goes over his personal career and mentions a bit about what he felt about the big corporations that took over the game industry. And he doesn't mention it clearly, but if you look at the dates when he left a previous game studios, it's almost a direct link with the big corporations. Microsoft with Age of Empires and the Activision Blizzard merge. Actions speak louder than words, and Greg, I take that in my mind. He also mentions that we'll have to look at the champions to know in which direction they will create the classes. So yeah, new video material. Next up, Greg mentions his experience working with Riot games, and for him the big thing that makes Riot different from other companies is that they put the player first. They look into the mind of the player, they play games themselves, and they want to project the image of Riot as the players themselves. And that is the very reason why everyone is so hyped about this project. People know that Riot uses a lot of values that actually were also used by Blizzard in the golden era of the MMO genre. Next section they go over the importance of streamers and the YouTube hype. Nothing really special here, but we all know that hype levels get boosted by YouTubers and streamers. That's basically why I have created this channel in the first place. You can see, like, sometimes I just open Twitch and I look, okay, which game here is super popular. Then I go through the list and I think, oh, maybe I try this game. Anyway, next section they talk about Kanon's main game, Lost Ark. And there is an interesting bit about the combat experience in MMOs. Greg mentioned that it is really hard for him to keep playing a game if the combat system is lackluster. So I think we can expect a polished combat system for the Riot MMO. Greg mentions also the importance of challenge in dungeons and raids. For Greg, raids and dungeons are the pinnacle of the MMO experience, to overcome the struggle together. For me, that's a very important thing. They talk about the epic scale in raiding with big groups of 30-40 players, and that there's a lot of room to create epic grand scale content. He mentioned also that as a developer you want to put many options for the player, because some players, they expect smaller groups, so they can play with just a group of friends. So yeah, in that way I'm happy they keep that in mind. But for me personally, I like big raids with 30-40 people. It's just there's no other experience in gaming for me. That's also a big reason why I play MMOs. Next section they talked about monetization in MMOs. If you want, you can watch my thoughts on that in the video description. Of course, you can also just watch the interview yourself. They also cover the sandbox versus theme park aspects of WoW Classic versus Shadowlands. Greg mentions that Shadowlands feels more like a single-player experience, and that he likes more the multiplayer aspects of an MMO. For example, he really liked the Shadowlands raids and dungeon content. Personally, I love the more sandbox style of games where player-driven content is encouraged instead of being spoon-fed into a story that is forced upon you, la la la. Don't get me wrong, I love story and lore very much, but I love also more player creativity. Creating your own stories in a game world can be very satisfying. Next up, they talk about faction versus no faction. Ghostcrawler mentions that faction-based MMOs are very good for story progression and community-driven content based on your favorite sports team, for example. But the downside of it is that you are restricted to choose a side if you want to play just with your friends, which for some groups of friends that is not a problem. In my opinion, I think factions are a bit outdated in the MMO industry and that this style is still a remnant from the Warcraft days. Even World of Warcraft actually got rid of that. It's cool to belong to a faction, but I think there are different ways of giving that faction vibe without letting the players choose a clear side. Next up, they talk about the balance of progression systems in MMOs. And basically, Greg mentions that it is super important to fine-tune this experience, that it doesn't feel like a huge grind, but it also lets you experience progressions towards your goals. Me personally, I don't care if there's a big grind. I played old school RuneScape. The grind never stops there, and it feels still very satisfying in my opinion. But you have a lot of options to train different kind of skills, and Greg points that out. If there are different options to mix the grind, then the grind doesn't feel as a grind, but more as an option to progress. And this is so huge for me as a player. Greg also says it feels mean to let players grind for hours a day to just be able to keep up with the game. And I'm so happy he mentioned this, because I hate logging in every day to keep up with the game. It should be relaxing, not about stressing out over a missed day of grinding because you want to keep raiding. Like, it's just stupid game design in my opinion. Next up, they talk about gear and drops. Greg mentions that he would love to bring that special feeling back of an item drop that is really special and epic. And I love that. That's also the reason why I play MMOs, to show off my gear and weapons, to impress noobs in town, because my real life self-esteem is extremely low. All jokes aside, up to the next discussion. Classes. Greg talks about the classes and how they need to balance that into a sustainable design for the future health of the game. Regarding class balance, raid team balance, and even gear cosmetic designs. Because if you design a new class from the ground up, everything changes. Gear designs for future raid content, weapons, and other cosmetics. So in that way, Greg likes new classes in MMOs, but they shouldn't add classes every month. If you do, yeah, you could make each class less distinctive from each other, but then you don't lean in a preset of a class fantasy. And I agree with this. If you make a pretty balanced roster of different class fantasies, I don't think 30 classes are super important. For example, people would call me crazy, but when Wrath of the Lich King first dropped, I was still maining my mage. I couldn't care less about it that night. Eventually it became a very popular class, but in the beginning I just cared about my mage. I think people like different classes, but it should feel like a total different experience and not too far away from standard class fantasy we all love. And I think that's where the balance lies. But I love class fantasies, and that's my opinion, of course. And for the last bits, they pointed out about character customization, and I think Greg loves the freedom of choice, and the industry kind of encourages freedom of choice now more than ever. Then we have a bit more info on PvP, and there Greg says something interesting. He wants to avoid that PvP players need to do PvE content to enjoy their PvP experience and vice versa. So if I read between the lines, I think Riot will balance the game differently for PvP players and PvE alike. In that way, you can have the freedom to design skills the way you want, especially for PvP content, and not have to consider the PvE aspect of the game. Again, super important detail that some MMOs still don't get. They create the same skills without tweaking them for PvP, and in my opinion, that's just stupid game design, because one of the two PvE or PvP experiences will have to suffer from this. Next up, they talk about tab targeting. Greg enjoys more the tab targeting experience in MMOs, and I do kind of agree here. I can mix up the tab targeting with action combat style, and for example, Guild Wars 2 did this already 10 years ago, so in my opinion, a mix between tab targeting and action combat is the way to go. But also, again, this is my opinion. And then the last but not least, the lore of the game. And here Greg mentions that in general, the lore and the main story of the game is very important to feel invested in the game, and I totally agree. If you like the story, it shouldn't change to something completely different. But Greg also mentioned that there is still room for changes in the little details, but it won't break the general idea behind the story. It doesn't have such a big impact on it. And I like this. Perfect consistency is also very predictable and sometimes not amusing anymore. People want a consistent story, but the details can change, because character can also change in game. And at last, Greg mentions he wants to share more info when they set things in stone and when systems are ready to be seen. So there is not going to be a big surprise Game Awards type reveal, but more small snippets of info in time. By this, the game devs have enough space to let players and fans give feedback about certain aspects of the game. Even if it hurts the devs, he said, they will still listen and will take a lot of things in consideration. And this makes me so happy. The ability to listen to the player base is really needed in the industry. Okay, I know guys, I went over these bits really quick, but again, if you have the time, please just go to the interview, just watch it. It's a very good interview in my opinion, and I bet Kanon did a lot of work for this, so go watch it. To end this video, I want your opinion about the interview. Did you learn new insights in the Riot MMO development, or are you still hungry for more info? Make sure to sub and like for some future reveals about the Riot MMO. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.